Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 4 wide receiver starter sets for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be going over some news around the National Football League, then going into the matchups at the wide receiver position for Week 4, then going over my top 36 rankings. Yes, there are more than 36 names that are applicable for this list. It was really tough to get it down to 36, but I finally did. Before we begin today's video, let me remind all of you to click that subscribe button. Thank you guys again for hitting that 9,000 subscriber mark. I will talk about what I was referring to yesterday in a little bit, but if you haven't yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community, click that like button down below, helps me a lot, and click that bell notification button to be notified when my latest content is out so you can stay up to date on all of your fantasy football related news. All right, guys, hey, how's it going? So yesterday, I referred to talking to you guys about something that I wanted to do for the community for hitting that 9,000 subscriber mark. So to kind of give you some context, there are a bunch of you that watch this channel. There are more people that watch this channel than there are subscribed. But the thing that I took away this season more than anything was answering questions. And I think a lot of you, and I know a lot of you, want your questions answered. So that's what I'm going to do. Instead of doing like a giveaway where I give away a jersey that's signed or something like that and only one person wins, I'm going to be able to answer all of your guys' questions for today on this said video to try to help everyone out. Okay, so here's the deal. Until the clock strikes midnight today on September 25th, 2019, this Wide Receiver Wednesday video, if you comment down below with a question, I will answer it. It can be flex, it can be dynasty, it can be trade, it can be etc. But the couple pieces of information that we need to clarify. Please tell me what your scoring format is, and please understand that if you ask me a question like, should I trade X, Y, or Z player, that is not enough context. You will have enough room, drop a paragraph, write it, I will respond. Okay, understand that. On top of that, anything else in terms of questions that I need to make sure and clarify, if it's quarterback or tight end related, I'd say wait for tomorrow. The video is going to come out. If you play in a 2 QB league, then maybe I understand because I only go over top 16. But quarterback and tight end questions could probably wait till tomorrow's video, and they'll be answered there. Other than that, wide receiver, running back, extra pickup, waiver wire, maybe defense question, trade question, dynasty question, hit me up down below today. Thank you guys again for helping me get to that 9,000 subscriber mark. We're on our way to 10,000, and that's absolutely incredible. So thank you again to helping me get there. And that's what we're going to do today. So just comment down below, and I'm going to get to them all. It's going to take me a while, so don't expect a response like that, but it's coming, okay? It'll be the day, okay? Thank you guys. All right, so before we get into Wide Receiver Wednesday, talking about my top 36 wide receivers and talking about matchups, let's talk about a couple information going around the National Football League as of right now. So currently, before we begin, timestamps down below for those of you who are looking to just get your fix and get out. So no big deal. So as I was mentioning, news around the National Football League. The number one trending thing currently is surrounding around Melvin Gordon. So Adam Schefter earlier today reported something of the area saying that Melvin Gordon could potentially be returning sometime soon, and that he was targeting coming back in October, and he could be returning even sooner, potentially even this week. And we're just holding our breath, waiting for him to show up. Here's the thing: whether he shows up or not, that's up to him. I can't predict whether he's going to show up. Sure, there can be rumors, but we also heard about rumors from last year surrounding Le'Veon Bell, and we know how that turned out. So thus far, we just wait. If you're an Austin Eckler owner, you can try to go and sell. I don't think that's the best possible scenario because probably everyone in your league already has the gist of Melvin Gordon news kind of floating around them. If they are, pretty interested in football, fantasy football, NFL, they probably already know by now that there's a couple rumors floating. So that probably won't be the best idea. As of right now, you can either hold on, maybe try to sell, and Eckler's in a good matchup, so you could potentially get something out of it. Again, the questions are available down below. Go ahead and ask, and we'll try to sell to that. But that was the biggest piece of information from this morning. Other stuff that related to the running back position that I saw, the New York Giants, there was a report that potentially they could go and sign Jay Ajayi. here's my thought process behind that. J.J. wasn't signed or hasn't been signed thus far. C.J. Anderson is still on the market. If they're really, truly looking for a running back to fill in while Saquon Barkley's gone, I don't understand why they wouldn't stick with Wayne Gallman. This is not a team that is in the fight for the playoffs and in the hunt. This is not the New Orleans Saints without their starting quarterback. This is the New York Giants with a brand new quarterback and without their franchise running back that probably weren't going to make the playoffs either way, whether it's with Eli or Daniel Jones. So I don't know if they're willing to go out and spend money for a guy like J.J. to come in for a couple weeks. But if they do it, so be it, and then they'll split the snaps in that backfield. And everybody who just put in a waiver, including me, for Wayne Gallman and won that waiver, will be screwed. I'm not saying go pick up J.J. Again, we heard J.J. rumors all around Houston situation earlier before Carlos Hyde got traded. Nothing really transpired with that. So just to kind of give you some context, those were the two pieces of information that came out today that was most relevant in terms of fantasy football around the National Football League. All right, let's get into fantasy football matchups for this week at the wide receiver position. From the top to the bottom, this is teams giving up points to opposing wide receivers. The Washington Redskins, absolutely. You know what's hilarious? Look at that. The Redskins and the Giants this week, they both give up the most points to opposing wide receivers, and they get to play each other this week. Honestly, Daniel Jones, Case Keenum, Sterling Shepard versus Terry McLaurin. You have Evan Ingram in that matchup. On the other side, maybe Vernon Davis can figure something out. Paul Richardson looked good on Monday night, a guy that I wasn't able to mention on waiver wires because, truth be told, the video was recorded before the Monday night game. But there's a lot of receiving options on these respective teams, and there's a lot of potential fantasy value to come out of that game. So just keep your eye on that. The Saints obviously giving up a lot of points to the wide receiver position. They get to play against the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football. The Eagles, always struggling in the secondary, have an early Thursday matchup against Davante Adams and MVS. The Texans get to play against Kyle Allen. We get to see if Kyle Allen is truly made for the NFL. If, in fact, Kyle Allen can string together some pretty good performances and Cam Newton, has to sit out for a couple more weeks, I'm telling you guys, there's always a potential. I don't know if you've ever heard the story about Wally Pipp, but if you haven't, go look it up. Anyway, moving on, let's talk about the Steelers against the Bengals. That should probably be a higher scoring game. The Jets are on a bye week along with the 49ers. Oakland playing against Indianapolis, Brissett, but he probably won't have T.Y. Hilton. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The Miami Dolphins always struggling on defense. And the Baltimore Ravens somehow have given up a lot of points to opposing wide receivers. Is that going to stand true when they get after Baker Mayfield? Baker's been struggling. The receiving core of that team has not looked very consistent at all this season. We'll see from that. Otherwise, talking about the tougher matchups thus far, the Atlanta Falcons haven't really given up much points. It's a really close range. It's literally a point difference between them and like the Cardinals, right? And that's almost like 6 spots. So sure, the Atlanta Falcons are considered one of the better teams. It's probably because opposing offenses run the ball heavily on them, and that's what they've done. That's what Derrick Henry's going to do this week, and there's not really too many receiving options for the Titans. The Browns on the other side against Marquise Brown. We'll see if they can figure that out. The Browns versus Brown. Not a bad matchup right there, right? The Colts playing against the Raiders. They played tough against Julio and Ridley. They completely eliminated Ridley, but they couldn't stop Julio and Mohamed Sanu. Do the Raiders have enough pieces? It'll probably be Darren Waller that's going to have majority of the influx of opportunity in that game like he has all season long. What else? The Titans somehow playing well against the wide receiver position, which kind of doesn't make sense to me. I'm telling you, what the heck is that? How is that even possible? All right, we're moving on. I don't know, man. I'm not convinced. The Cowboys, the Buffalo Bills, the Broncos, the Packers, the Rams, and the Patriots. Patriots have always been good defensively. Belichick runs a tight script over there, and they always shut down opposing offenses, and they've had a very easy strength of schedule thus far. That doesn't change very much this week. Against the Bills, sure, the Bills are 3-0, but this is still going to be a tough matchup for the Bills to move offensively. The Rams are really locking down wide receivers, but I don't think that's going to change. I think Mike Evans and Chris Godwin will still be able to produce. But anyway, these are the matchups. These are how many points defenses have given to opposing wide receivers through the first 3 weeks of the fantasy football season in half PPR. Just kind of give you guys a perspective. Let's go ahead and let's talk about my rankings, shall we? Let's get into the bread and butter of this episode. All right, guys. So here we go. Week 4 wide receiver rankings. Rankings are always subject to change. We're talking about my RB1s, excuse me, the wide receiver ones of the week going into week 4. Number 1 is Julio Jones. Like I've mentioned in the past, there's no way Julio Jones is getting outside of my top 5 receivers unless he's on a bye week. This guy's absolutely incredible. The production that he has had thus far this season is insane. The amount of red zone touchdowns he has had, the amount of opportunity he has got in the red zone is something that we have not seen Julio have in more than maybe 6 years. We haven't seen Julio crack that double-digit receiving touchdown mark in quite some time. And I think Julio Jones has a very good opportunity this year with the amount of production he has, the amount of opportunity he consistently gets. He is looking like the best wide receiver in football. Next to number 2, obviously, Keenan Allen. But the thing that we have to keep in mind, for those of you who are Julio Jones owners, Julio's schedule only gets better as the season progresses. Once they come back from their bye week, if I'm not mistaken, it's in week 9. Let me go ahead and confirm that so I'm not talking out of my you-know-what. Let's find this. Julio Jones, if I'm not mistaken, let's click this button, has a week 9 bye week. Once they come back from their bye week, they get to play against New Orleans, Carolina, Tampa Bay, New Orleans, Carolina, and San Francisco. That right there is the best schedule you can have for a quarterback wide receiver combo that I've ever seen. You get to play against all of the teams from the NFC South. I mentioned this earlier this season during the offseason in my wide receiver strength of schedule video. Julio only gets better going forward. The couple matchups he'll have in the next couple weeks might be a little bit tough, but Julio is matchup proof, and he's only going to get better. At the pace that he started at, he might truly end up as the number 1 wide receiver by season's end. All right, moving on to number 2. Let's talk about Keenan Allen, the guy on the thumbnail, the guy that has absolutely been tearing apart the league thus far, the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy football, a guy that truly is carrying his offense, even when the other pieces like Mike Williams, Hunter Henry disappearing, Austin Eckler sometimes struggling. Keenan Allen is the through line of this Chargers offense. He is the most consistent and productive piece of this offense, and going forward into this matchup against Miami, it's not going to be any different. Miami has struggled against the wide receiver position. No matter what, they're going to line up Keenan Allen across the formation in order to just feed him the ball. He's going to see 10 plus targets as per usual, and he's going to have a great fantasy week in week 4. He's my number 2. Moving on to number 3, Amari Cooper. Like I mentioned before, the New Orleans Saints early on in the season, always, New Orleans Saints struggle defensively. They tighten it up as the season progresses and they get closer to the playoffs. But thus far this season, they've struggled mightily against opposing wide receivers. Just this last week, we saw Tyler Lockett catch 12 passes for over 100 yards. The week before that, the Saints take on the Nelson Agholors and no, excuse me. What the heck? What am I saying? The Saints. What the hell did they play that week before? Why am I fumbling this? Oh, they played against the Rams. That's right. They played against my Rams and Cooper Kupp. I got it all twisted there. They played against Cooper Kupp and Brandin Cooks. Both of them had amazing games. The week before that, in week 1, the New Orleans Saints had a pretty decent week. They ended up taking the W, but DeAndre Hopkins had his best game of the season in week 1 against them. So going forward, Amari Cooper with Michael Gallup still down. I know last week Randall Cobb had a 70-yard touchdown called back against the Miami Dolphins, but Amari Cooper is still going to be fed the rock, and he is, outside of Zeke and Dak, maybe keeping the ball here and there, he's the best player in that offense, especially in the passing game. So he's my number 3. Moving on to number 4, Davante Adams. I think of all the weeks that Davante Adams has an opportunity to really turn it around, it is against the Eagles on a short week at home. It's a great matchup. The Eagles struggle mightily against opposing wide receivers. Their secondary has not been good. Their top corner, Ronald Darby, will probably not have much of a chance against Davante Adams. The issue with Davante Adams' production thus far this season has been his lack of usage in the red zone and his lack of receiving touchdowns. We have to remember, each of the last 3 seasons, Davante Adams has scored 10-plus receiving touchdowns. That is what has built his fantasy presence in this entire landscape. Davante Adams going forward should be fine. I know many of you are panicking. If you are not a Davante Adams owner, I would consider right now going and buying him before he has a breakout week, because once he does, you will not have an opportunity going forward. All right, moving on to number 5, DeAndre Hopkins, a guy that, again, similar to Julio, will never be outside of my top 5 conversation because he is one of the best wide receivers in the league. I understand. In the last 2 weeks, he has truly not been up to par. He's only put up, 6 or 7 points in half PPR scoring formats. DeAndre Hopkins has not looked great. He has had, pretty decent coverage on him. Casey Hayward last week shadowed him for I think the stat that I read was shadowed him for 60% of the game. And on all of those shadows, he had 0 receptions. So he's had, quite a difficult task at hand in the last couple weeks. This week against the Panthers, again, Bradbury's probably going to be on top of him. They're probably going to double cover him, but hopefully DeAndre Hopkins can turn the script around. I'm never leaving him on my bench no matter what. This is a guy that 100% is one of the most talented receivers, and with Watson is only better, so he's my number 5. Moving on to number 6, Juju Smith-Schuster. Thank God Juju last week was able to at least get some life back into that offense. He had to make the play on his own with his legs, sure, but as Juju sits in the slot position going forward, it's only going to help him. I think the more targets he gets, the more opportunity he gets, the more of a playmaking receiver this is. We know that Juju can take the top off of the defense. We know underneath he can play with his legs and get some yards after the catch. Juju Smith-Schuster against the Cincinnati Bengals, which is an extremely easy matchup. This helps Mason Rudolph. There's not going to be too much pressure on him in terms of pass rush. He's going to have time to sit back in the pocket, either hand it off to James Conner, etc., or feed the ball to Juju. I think Juju going forward, especially in this matchup, is a good play. Moving on to number 7, Odell Beckham Jr. Again, like I mentioned, it's kind of interesting how the Baltimore Ravens have struggled against the wide receiver position. We know they got smacked up last week by the Kansas City Chiefs, but who doesn't, right? It doesn't matter what defense you are not capable of stopping that offense thus far, unless you're the Patriots in the playoffs, which is a different conversation. But Odell Beckham Jr. against the Baltimore Ravens this coming week, a lot of his production is purely dependent on Baker Mayfield. Like I've mentioned before, when you draft a wide receiver, you are drafting that quarterback combination with him. So do you really want to trust a Flacco or an Eli? I've always mentioned this. At this moment in time, there goes Snapchat. At this moment in time, Odell Beckham Jr. being associated with Baker is not helping him in fantasy value. Hopefully this week we can find more targets for him. I feel like with Baker having to run out of the pocket and scramble so often because of pass rushes, he can never really get Odell Beckham to finish his route and hit him for a consistent, at least on target pass. Unfortunately, it's going to be tough this week, but I'm never leaving Odell Beckham on the bench. Moving on, let's go to number 8, Cooper Kupp. It's unbelievable how much Jared Goff and Sean McVay use Cooper Kupp within this offense. Robert Woods has pretty much been deemed worthless at this point. They very rarely use him. They target him here and there. They always use that 3 wide receiver set. They always use their jet sweep formations. That's fine. Cooper Kupp though is he's a safety blanket. He is. And if he's going to get that much work in the passing game, and if he's going to continuously, a part of this offense, who is a higher scoring offense in the National Football League, have good matchups like as such going against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think Cooper Kupp is set to have a great week. He's my number 8. Moving on to number 9, Tyler Lockett. After week 1, in which you only had 1 catch, Tyler Lockett has really turned this season around. The entire Saints offense, the entire Seattle Seahawks offense has flipped the script. Comparatively to last year, the Seattle Seahawks ran the ball far more last season comparatively to this year. Now that we've seen the Seattle Seahawks go down in games and have to come back in the passing game, now that they have pieces like DK Metcalf and Will Disley back, and they're using Tyler Lockett as that Doug Baldwin-esque receiver in the slot and around the formation, we've really seen Tyler Lockett take that next step forward that I was hoping to see, and it's absolutely incredible. Going forward, this guy is, if you're in a good matchup with Tyler Lockett, he plays against the Cardinals secondary, it's just free. And I think Lockett's going to have a great game. He's my number 9. Moving on to 10. Okay, so someone's got to tell me this. Was it just the Giants that were bad? Or did Mike Evans had a fantastic game? No one's going to take that from him. 190 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. He had only 1 catch in the second half, sure, because they were up a pretty wide margin from their first half adventures. But Mike Evans, the question is, was last week's performance just a fluke? Can he continue to see the targets that he saw last week? The Tampa Bay Buccaneers made an effort to feed him the ball over Chris Godwin. Hopefully, that's going to continue to be the thing. If this team is going to throw the ball 30 times a game, you have to feed 10 of those targets to Mike Evans. He is good enough of a wide receiver to make the plays. Jameis just needs to at least put it in his wingspan. At least if you put it in his wingspan, there is an opportunity for him to catch the ball. And I think going into this week against the Rams, I understand it's a tougher matchup. You have Marcus Peters, you have Aqib Talib. They're good cornerbacks. You still have Eric Weddle over the top. There are points in which you can expose this defense, and Mike Evans. I've done that in the past. I've mixed those up, or I've at least fluked on the. Anyway, as I was saying, Mike Evans could potentially have a pretty good game against the Rams. He's my number 10. Moving on to number 11, Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas still saw usage. The question is whether or not Michael Thomas can perform within this offense against a tougher matchup. The Dallas defense should be a tougher matchup for them, but I still think that if Michael Thomas is going to see 8+ targets, that's perfectly fine. That's exactly what we want to see from him, because if he can go ahead and lock those down, he will potentially make a big play this coming week. And he's a guy that we can't leave on the bench, plain and simple. So we're moving him to number 11 this week with full confidence. Moving on to number 12, another Rams wide receiver. Sitting here at the number 12 spot is Brandin Cooks. Outside of Cooper Kupp, Brandin Cooks has really become the number 1-2-esque wide receiver for this offense. This season, he's taken a step forward in the last couple games in terms of targets, in terms of receiving yards. He's been great. He's a receiver that can take the top off the defense. Playing against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense, I think, is a very favorable matchup in my opinion, and I think Brandin Cooks going into this week should be fine. The whole thing is Brandin Cooks only needs one play and he can really set your fantasy week, but the amount of targets he gets, it only helps him. It's only gravy on top of the already set, baseline of production. All right, moving on. Let's talk about my wide receiver 2s, my 13 through 24 rankings. All right, let's talk about number 13, Kenny Golladay. Kenny Golladay disappeared last week in a extremely good matchup against the Eagles. Marvin Jones was the benefactor of all of that production, all of that opportunity. Kenny Golladay took the back seat, and unfortunately, there's a possibility that could happen again. Marvin Jones has been seen, or has at least consistently been a producer for this Lions offense in the past. We saw him back in 2017 be a wide receiver 1 in formats because of his touchdown count, because of his usage in this offense, his deep ball threat, his bigger frame, being able to go up in contested catches. We've seen him be a productive wide receiver. I think Kenny Golladay is going to get back on track, though. I think the matchup against the Chiefs, again, another favorable one. This is going to be a shootout. The Chiefs are going to put up a lot of points. It's up to Matthew Stafford, another gunslinger, to try to come out here and even up the score. And I think Kenny Golladay is what he's going to use to do that. All right, moving on to number 14, talking about the Redskins and Giants matchup. We have Terry McLaurin, the guy that has come out of nowhere, the 3rd-round pick for the Washington Redskins, and has put up incredible fantasy numbers thus far. I think he dropped a touchdown the other day. It wasn't even a drop. It was contested, but he could have even had a bigger game last week against the Bears of all defenses. He could have had a 20-point week. They are feeding the ball to Terry McLaurin. The Redskins, they have they have been passing the ball exclusively. The run game does not exist within this offense. Adrian Peterson is just, if I'm not mistaken, he's averaging like 2 yards per carry. He hasn't looked good at all. And neither has this offensive line in the running game. But that being said, Terry McLaurin is the number 1 receiving option of this team. Case Keenum has looked good in garbage time, in regular time. Doesn't matter. I understand he threw some interceptions, but that comes with the territory of playing quarterback at times. But Terry McLaurin, scary Terry, he's good to go. He should be a great play this week for those of you who have him. All right, moving on to number 15, Sammy Watkins. Okay, here's the thing about Watkins. He hasn't been great in the last 2 weeks. A lot of his production came from one game, and that was in week 1. Tyreek Hill was on one side of the field playing as a distraction. Kind of opened up some lanes for Sammy Watkins. Hopefully, Watkins can get back to being a deep ball, receiver, or at least have the threat of scoring a touchdown. We haven't seen that in the last 2 weeks. That has completely been dominated by Mecole Hardman and Demarcus Robinson, who we'll talk about in a little bit on this Chiefs offense. But I think Sammy Watkins is still a guy that you cannot sit. If you're associated with this offense, you have to play him. And I think as the number one wide receiver, he's always going to have the targets, the opportunity, the snap counts. And that's extremely valuable going against this matchup. I understand there's probably going to be a Darius Slay running around shadowing him, but they'll move him around in order to try to help him out this week. He's my number 15. All right, moving on to number 16. Here's the thing about Adam Thielen. The Vikings this season, if I'm not mistaken, have only only passed the ball like 35% of the time, and they've ran the ball the rest of the time. Imagine that. So here's the thing about the Vikings offense. This coming week, there's a potential where Dalvin Cook gets stuffed and they can't run the ball. There's a potential of that. Now, we've seen Adam Thielen in the past be successful as a wide receiver. He was great last week. Had a rushing touchdown that he stole from Dalvin Cook. I'm still salty about it, but I still won. It's okay. And there's been opportunities in which he's been able to get work in the passing game in the red zone. Stefon Diggs is MIA. But Adam Thielen has, kind of helped fantasy owners here and there thus far. He's at least putting up 10-plus points every week. That at least we can, at least the average is there. But as of right now, going into this matchup, it's as tough as it gets. Last time they played against the Bears, they double covered the crap out of Adam Thielen and forced Kirk Cousins to feed the ball to Stefon Diggs. Now, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think they're going to move him around. It's only so often that you're going to double a slot receiver like Adam Thielen. But we'll see. He's playing in the slot, he's playing on the outside. We'll see how it works out. But I think Adam Thielen's a guy that you have to put into your lineup this week, despite the matchup, and hope that, like Terry McLaurin last week, he can find some seams and expose this defense. Moving on. Number 17, Julian Edelman has been cleared to go. Should be ready to play. Against the Bills last season, I think he surpassed 100 receiving yards in both games, or at least had a touchdown in one of the games for sure, and the other one had over 100 receiving yards. This Bills matchup should be fine for him. As of right now, the question is whether or not Phillip Dorsett or Josh Gordon's going to be another one of those receiving threats in this offense. We'll determine that in a little bit when we go over this, the wide receiver threes. But in terms of Edelman being the Cooper Kupp of this offense, the true safety blanket of Tom Brady, I think going forward into this matchup as a wide receiver too, I have a lot of confidence in him. He's my number 17. Moving on to number 18, Nelson Agholor. So as of right now, recording this video, I have no clue on the whereabouts of Alshon Jeffrey. So as of right now, we're going to assume that Alshon Jeffrey might play, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. I have a potentially if he plays rank. But as of right now, I really do feel like whether or not he plays, Nelson Agholor is going to be a top 24 wide receiver. Last week proves it again. The guy got over 10 targets, had 8 receptions, 2 receiving touchdowns in a PPR format where you are given points per reception. A guy that is catching the ball 8 times a game is extremely valuable, no matter his yards count. Yeah, last week he only had 50 receiving yards. Does not matter. Nelson Agholor is going to be used in this offense this coming week. It's a short week. This offense is predicated around getting the ball out of Carson Wentz's hands as possibly fast as they can, especially when this Green Bay defense is getting after him this week. So Nelson Agholor, again, another pretty good wide receiver option. Those of you who have picked him up, I don't mind starting him at all. Moving on to number 19, Marquise Brown of the Ravens. Here's the thing about the Ravens. They struggled last week. A lot of it had to do with the game script kind of being shifted because of the fact that they were down so many points so early. Sure, they got a lot of rushing touchdowns in the red zone. That was just a product of their field positioning. But I really do think that Marquise Brown is going to have a week that he can make fantasy owners proud of. The first 2 weeks of the season were fire. We were perfectly happy with that, especially week 1, but nobody really started him there unless you were a DFS monster. Week 2, perfectly fine with that kind of production. In week 3, it could have been better, especially against the Chiefs. Week 4, he has another opportunity here against the Browns defense to expose them, and I think he's going to have a good opportunity, and he's going to act upon it. It's all about Lamar Jackson. If Lamar Jackson can accurately throw him the ball, he's going to target him because he's the number 1 wide receiver of this offense. All right, moving on to number 20, Larry Fitzgerald. Larry Legend, as good as it gets. This offense, similar to, actually quite opposite to the Vikings, like I was mentioning with Adam Thielen earlier. This offense for the The Arizona Cardinals only throws the ball. They don't want to do anything but throw the ball. They're sitting in 4 wide receiver sets. They're feeding the ball to Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk, and they're moving it like that. Obviously, there's other, there's Byard and there's Keyshawn Johnson moving around in the formation, David Johnson here and there. Charles Clay at the tight end position, catching a couple passes here and there. But still, Larry Fitzgerald is the number 1 wide receiver of this offense going into this matchup against the Seahawks, who have given up a fair amount of points in the last couple of weeks to opposing offenses. I think Larry Fitzgerald is just bound to have another good week. Moving on to 21, Tyler Boyd playing against the Steelers. Tyler Boyd, not a great week 3 matchup against the Bills. Interestingly enough, Tre'Davious White was on him. No matter whether or not he was in the slot, Tre'Davious White was going to follow him. White kind of hopped around, went over to Ross a couple times, but still, both of them got a pretty good licking from him, and it's not really a fun matchup when you have one of the best corners shadowing you for majority of the game. But this coming week, there's not too much of a threat. I don't think Joe Hayden's coming down into the slot to cover, a Tyler Boyd kind of player. He'll probably be sitting on the outside for Ross, and I think Boyd will be fine in this matchup. That should be a higher scoring event between the two teams from the AFC North. So I think the Bengals-Steelers game should be high scoring. Boyd should be good. Moving on to 22, Chris Godwin. Here's the thing about Godwin. Like I mentioned before, if they're going to feed the ball to Mike Evans more, Chris Godwin will see a little bit of the backseat and we'll have to just pick up the scraps. Hopefully, that'll kind of transition into a 7 to 8 target kind of games for him, in which he can at least catch 5 or 6 of those passes, put up 60 receiving yards, and potentially have that touchdown. That's what we want to see from Chris Godwin. Anything more than that would be fantastic, but that would hurt Evans. So we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. I don't care which one of them becomes a wide receiver 1. I don't care which one of them becomes a wide receiver 2. As long as there's some consistency here so that we can at least depend upon them in specific matters, that's all I ask for. Moving on to number 23, Mecole Hardman. The guy that has put up incredible numbers in the last 2 weeks off big catches. The guy will take one pass of 60-plus yards and take it to the house so quickly that you really just can't stop him. Now, is it an inevitability that he's going to do something similar to that this coming week? I think so. I think with this offense, Demarcus Robinson, right now is the number 2 wide receiver. Mecole Hardman, only playing about 75% of the snaps, will still come in, and he'll still take one to the house because Patrick Mahomes is going to be able to just light up this defense. He always finds the seam, and a guy like this who's running 4.3 or sub 4.3, sometimes, that's what I've heard. Someone said 4.2. I was like, this is not John Ross. What's going on here? Either way, Mecole Hardman's a fast son of a gun, and against this matchup against the Lions, he's going to find something. And I'm pretty happy playing him as a wide receiver too. I don't mind it. I understand the upside and I understand the risk. If you're willing to take that risk, that's why you play a guy like this. All right, moving on to number 24, Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley gets play against the Titans. I think week 3 was a little bit of a matchup / fluke situation. The guy only had 1 target, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Let me confirm this. What the heck did Calvin Ridley do? Oh, dang it. Why did I click this wrong? Let me go to players. If I'm not mistaken, I think I looked at this yesterday. I was like, how the heck did you only have 1 target? Yeah, 1 target, 1 reception, 6 yards. A lot of that has to do with Mohamed Sanu, guys. Mohamed Sanu is a receiver that many people forget about. But because of the fact that he even sees more snaps than Julio and Calvin Ridley in this offense, because he's the better blocking receiver, he's going to be on the field. Calvin Ridley hopefully will get back to, those 6+ targets that he's typically going to get. In week 2, he had 10 targets, 8 receptions. If they can see, they can feed him the ball like that, I understand. He's not the Julio of this offense. But again, the Falcons are throwing the ball 65% of the time as well. Similar to last season, hopefully Calvin Ridley can kind of find himself again this coming week at home against the Titans defense. Adoree Jackson, Malcolm Butler, if they're going to play man on one of these receivers, on Julio or Calvin Ridley, one of them is going to take the top off the defense and score. That's for certain. DJ Chark was able to do it, for God's sake. All right, moving on. That's nothing against Chark because we're about to talk about Chark, but either way. Let's talk about 25, Sterling Shepard. To start off my wide receiver 3s, fantastic matchup. He is the number 1 wide receiver of this team, probably in terms of Targets and usage will be a little bit behind Ingram because I've already seen Daniel Jones really focus in on Ingram, especially down in the goal line. But Sterling Shepard going forward until Golden Tate comes back, which won't be this week, against the Redskins, fantastic matchup. We saw Taylor Gabriel, of all wide receivers, score 3 touchdowns this past week against them. So going into this match, I think the stat was cornerbacks for the Washington Redskins have given up more touchdowns than any other team thus far this season. And that's why they're giving up the most points at the position. So Sterling Shepard should have a good week with Daniel Jones. Moving on to number 26, Tyrell Williams. It's a tough matchup. The Colts have a good secondary, but he is getting his ample amount of targets. He is getting in the end zone, and he's finding fantasy value. That's why he is going to consistently stay in this top 20 or top 30 list. He's my number 26. Number 27, Christian Kirk. Again, gets his targets, is heavily used in this offense. They love to pass the ball, and Kyler Murray is going to continue to look your way, feed you the rock. You're going to be fantasy relevant, 10 plus fantasy points. Why not? All right, moving on to 28, DJ Chark. Last couple weeks, as in the last 3 weeks, has been absolutely incredible in terms of finding the end zone. Sure, his target counts can fluctuate here and there. They play against the Denver Broncos. It is not an easy matchup to play against the Denver Broncos, but I think if Gardner Minshew is going to feed him the ball because Marquise Lee is worthless, and D.D. Westbrook every now and then out of the slot, Conley, there's a text message. Hold up, give me a second. All right. That's going to, if another one spammed through, I was like, all right, we're going to have problems. But if Gardner Minshew is going to consistently treat him as their number one wide receiver, he's going to have relevant fantasy value. And therefore, at 28, I like his value. Moving on to 29, Marquez, Valdez, Scantling on the Thursday night matchup against the Eagles, a guy that saw 10 targets last week against the Broncos, had a great game. I think this coming week, they're going to heavily pass the ball. They may avoid passing the ball to Marquez, Valdez, Scantling because I have heard Aaron Rodgers come out and say, hey, Davante Adams has not seen enough targets. I need to pass him the ball more, and I need to pass Jimmy Graham the ball more. Now, that could just be him saying that because somebody asked him about the situation. He's going to pass the ball to the open man. And if Marquez Valdez-Scantling is on the field, is the number 2 wide receiver, and is open, playing against the second corner of the Eagles, I think he's going to have some fantasy value. He's my number 29. Demarcus Robinson at 30, the number 2 wide receiver of the Chiefs as of this moment, finding the end zone each of the last 2 weeks, has had 40 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks. I understand that week 2 performance was out of the ordinary. 30 plus points is kind of ridiculous, but he's a guy that has the ability, similar to Mecole Hardman, similar to Tyreek Hill, similar to Sammy Watkins, to catch a ball on a slant and take it to the house. These guys are ridiculous. They can play all around the field, and because of how good Patrick Mahomes is, it makes them better players. He's at number 30 this week against the Lions. Moving on to 31, we have Emmanuel Sanders. Here's the thing about Sanders. He had a little bit of an underwhelming performance this past week against the Green Bay Packers. That's fine. The 2 prior weeks, he was heavily targeted. He was used in the red zone, and I think they're going to get back to that. Probably the chances are Jalen Ramsey, A.J. Boye, they're not going to really be covering him. The guy sits in the slot position for majority of games. Sure, there's a chance that DaeSean Hamilton kind of sits in the slot, and there's a potential that they shift out Emmanuel Sanders and he gets covered. But I heard something of the sort where Jalen Ramsey's a little beat up. He's got some hamstring issues, lower back problems. So we'll see if he even plays this week, but that's a different conversation. Either way, I still think Emmanuel Sanders is a top 36 wide receiver in the NFL in terms of fantasy. Moving on to 32, DJ Moore. Only had 1 catch, 50 yards, and a touchdown. Made his fantasy week, but I think he's going to see more targets this coming week playing against the Houston Texans. I think Kyle Allen will spread the ball out more. It's not going to be so easy to feed the ball to a Greg Olsen. So DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel will both be fine. That's why they're both on this list. But DJ Moore is the number 1 wide receiver of that team. And they'll probably feed him way more targets than he saw last week. Moving on to 33, Robert Woods. Still have to have him on this list because he is associated with a great offense, and he has the potential to have a 10-plus target week in which he turns into 8 catches for 70 yards. And I think there's always a possibility of that when you play against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I don't want to, completely write him off because of a couple unfortunate performances. Sure, he hasn't been great, but there's always a lot of time left in the season to get back on track. This could be a week. All right, he's my number 33. Moving on to 34, Curtis Samuel, like I mentioned it before. Curtis Samuel going forward, he saw a majority of the targets in this offense, saw more snaps than any receiving option on this offense last week. So Curtis Samuel could be Kyle Allen's, obviously Greg Olsen's the security blanket, and obviously Christian McCaffrey's the guy that they want to feed. But with Curtis Samuel's ability to take the top off the defense, be a versatile player, and had the most targets, had the most snaps amongst all wide receivers last week, he's another pretty good option this coming week. Moving on to 35, Phillip Dorsett. I decided to put Phillip Dorsett above Josh Gordon for a couple reasons. I find that Josh Gordon sometimes, or majority of the times, is going to get the number one opposing cornerback coverage on him because he is such a bigger threat, and because in terms of size, speed, he's a pretty athletic wide receiver, and they want to bottle him up and not let him take advantage. Somehow Phillip Dorsett in these formations as the number 3 wide receiver finds himself value, continues to score touchdowns. Last week in week 1, week 2 didn't do much because AB was there. No more AB. Phillip Dorsett has another opportunity. He's my number 35. Moving on to my last wide receiver, a guy that I really thought could be off this list if, in fact, the 2 names under me were on it. Stefon Diggs has not looked good. If, in fact, the Bears somehow want to double cover Adam Thielen again and force Kirk Cousins to feed the ball to Stefon Diggs, he could have himself a week. Only a matter of time until Stefon Diggs finally joins us in 2019. Is this the week? I don't think so. But I still have to respect his talent. I still have to respect the opportunity that he gets within this offense. Therefore, he'll sit at 36 this week. All right, really quickly to mention, if T.Y. Hilton plays, he's my number 18 this week. And if Alshon Jeffrey plays, he's my number 26. So what does that mean? If Alshon Jeffrey is cleared to go, we would slot him in at the number 26 spot. Tyrell Williams would move down 1 accordingly. All right, guys, those are my top 38 sort of rankings. But technically 36. We'll see about these injuries for the 2019 season for week 4 at the wide receiver position. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Please, if you ask a question down below, make sure you let me know what your scoring format is. Make sure you give me more details, and don't just ask me a random question like, should I trade X, Y, or Z? Give me the actual trade, one side, the other side, and I'll give you my answer. Thank you, guys, again, helping me get to 9,000. I appreciate all the support. If you haven't yet already, click that subscribe button, click that like button, join the community. And tomorrow we will be talking about wide receivers and tight ends. And until then, I'll see you guys. Peace.